So what happens in network care is that there are 5 phases, we call them. There are 5 spinal cord tension patterns. And when we first start care at the very beginning, we call that level 1, we're in more of a defensive pattern with that. And as we go through care and that pattern starts to unwind, it opens up into a different consciousness. So I'm going to share some of that with you. In phase 1, we're working with the sacrum, which is more geared to the past, and then later on the occiput, which is more future focused. In phase 2, that's C1, that's the very top of the spine. Physically, that goes to the immune system, it's the parasympathetic, it's the adrenals, it's blood sugar, it's emotions, a lot is loaded up there. Really important part, the mouth of God. That particular phase has to do with time, feeling like there's never enough time. Future, concerned about the future. I'm not going to have enough time to do what I need to do. I don't even know if I know what I need to do. Not trusting that I'll get my spiritual answers, that I'll get my download. When that pattern opens up, that's the beginning, when that pattern starts to unwind, all of a sudden we start to feel like we can relax in the present because we trust that we're going to hear what we need to hear. Time is just time. I have all the time in the world, maybe. Phase 3 is pelvis, identity. We hold a lot of our identity in our pelvis. When somebody is going through a marriage or a divorce, phase 3 shows up. They're going through a career change, phase 3 shows up. Let's do questions after. That identity has to do with present time, work, relationships, finance, anything that's going on presently for you. As that starts to shift, your sense about yourself, who you've been, that box we lock ourselves into is this is who I am, really starts to open up. And we go through a period of time sometimes where we're like, huh, what do I believe? Until the new comes forth and we're solid in the new paradigm. And maybe it's a work change, maybe it's a relationship change, maybe we move. So our identity, our sense of self starts to change. Phase 4, which I mentioned earlier, is the 2nd and 3rd vertebrae in the neck, is where that spinal cord tension gets hung up, I'll say. And we access that pattern through 2nd and 3rd vertebrae in the neck. It has a lot to do with mind. A lot of phase 4 people. And we have all these patterns. There's 1 or 2 that's dominant, and you might recognize that as we're explaining it. And then the other ones are kind of in the background. And so as we move a dominant pattern or 2 through care, those other ones come through as well. They're just not as significant in our life, but yet they support us hugely. So mind, when I say mind, we go into a place where we like order and control. And it's a real familiar one for me because it was a very inherent process when I started network care. And a lot of network docs, a lot of people. That pattern happens when you grow up in a very chaotic household, maybe trauma, maybe lots of arguing, and it feels chaotic, and that child goes into some sense of order to feel safe in the world. And then even though we leave home, we keep that pattern going because it's in there. Right? As we start to unwind this pattern, we start to relax a little bit. The mind gets quieter, and we can be more spontaneous, more playful, more creative. Maybe we don't look at our day timer for half the day. Right? And so we start to relax a little bit more. Beautiful pattern to work with. Phase 5 is the double-ended patterns. Phase 5 means that there's a tension pattern held up in the upper spine and the pelvis. So there's 2 patterns. One will either pull us side to side, or it'll pull us this way, front to back. Okay? Side to side is typically, well, it could be anywhere in the neck, but typically second and third vertebrae and pelvis. And it's a pattern where, like, if I stand like this, you can feel like what's pulling me in two different directions. Conflict. Right? My mind wants this, but my heart wants this. My parents wanted this, but I wanted this. And we tend to please the authority rather than ourself. So that pattern has kind of an acquiescence when it's in defense. Make sense? When we clear that pattern and go through that process, there is, and it goes, you know, we might see it and then it comes back and then we keep working on it. It gets easier and easier to move it through the levels of care. But we start to see a certain alignment with what is right for you, and a dropping away of what mom and dad and friends and culture feel about this, even though it's in the background. That's conditioning, but we start to move forward into what our heart is talking about for us. Our heart leads us. This pattern that pulls us this way is typical. Both of these phase 5 patterns have a lot of emotion around them because it's the end of the spinal cord, both ends pulling on us. This pattern, where the tail is tucked between the legs and the lower neck typically is pulled forward, has to do with a lot of trauma. Maybe we've been bullied. Maybe we feel victimized. Abuse is a big one for that pattern. And because we've been in defense with that pattern, we might say, yeah, I'm happy, but yet you don't feel that genuine happiness. But when that pattern starts to open up, there's this huge heart in there that hasn't been expressed at the level that it could because it's been withheld. So that's the gist of the patterns. Typically, again, there's one or two dominant patterns and then the other ones start to follow and clear as well as we go.